Hey everyone, welcome to Findable English Reformation, hosted by me, Mr. Liam Macklin. Can everyone hear me? Can I get a thumbs up if you can hear me well? I'm trying out this new microphone. Let's see how many people are here live. Yeah, I see there are 5 people out, so just give me a thumbs up. What's up? Okay, I can hear you. Thumbs up. Okay, you can hear me great. Good, thank you. Yes. I'm trying up this new microphone, so I'll see if I got my money's worth from Amazon, $15. We'll leave it a review after that. You guys will tell me how it's working out. Okay, so yeah, welcome to Findable English Reformation. Henry VIII, probably the most exciting thing about the Reformation is Henry VIII. How many movies have been going on about Henry VIII? Anyone seen any good movies about Henry VIII? Elizabeth? Bloody Mary? So there's so many movies out there. We don't have time to go over all of them, but we'll just get straight into it and talk about the English Reformation once the volume is all clear. So just want to keep on going on with this. So again, remember, think Findable. Think about checking out Findable on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. Check out the videos. If you guys are here earlier in the game, it's really increasing your chances of getting a 5 at the AP exam earlier on in the game. So just heads up, everyone can just maybe tell me in the chat room where they're from, what city, what state, school. Maybe there's some people from the same school around here. I'm from New York, by the way, in case I didn't mention that before. You can just tell us. All right, people don't want to say. And can anyone tell me what they're studying right now? Oh, okay. Okay, we got Wisconsin, East High, Chicago. Okay, great. Okay, so all around the place. Queensboro. Okay, Kentucky, California. Wow, California. That's 3 hours difference. Wow, I'm very pleased you're joining us. Dallas, Texas, Michigan. I love it. It's all across the USA. Beautiful job. And what people are learning right now, has anyone got into the Reformation yet? Can anyone tell me? Or in the Reformation? Yes, okay, great. Yeah, okay, so I mean, most schools just started the year right now. Northern Renaissance, yeah, Northern Renaissance, okay. Midway through. Okay, so I mean, you might get a head start by listening to this cast. You might come to prepare to class, so people think you know a lot of stuff. That's great. Just hang in and help him. Okay, cool. All right, so let's just talk about coming soon. The next stream that are going to be available in the AP Europe, we got the Counter Reformation with Chris. It's going to go September 21st. We got the French War of Religion, September 21st with Sherry, and I'm going to do the next installment about the Baroque art on October 6th. Anyone fan of art over here? Thumbs up for art? Who's an art person? Okay. All right, so let's talk about today's thing. Oh, thumbs up for art. There we go. Big art people. Yes. Who likes painting? Who likes museum? Nothing to be ashamed, people. It's all cool. All right. So in today's stream, we're going to talk about what was the English Reformation, and we'll talk about the reason why England became Protestant. So again, if you're thinking about skills for the test, that's a great causation question. And another question to think about throughout the stream, other than causation, is comparison. 2 thumbs up. I love it. Other than causation, it's comparison. We might want to compare this English Reformation to the German Reformation. So you got to think in terms of question when we go throughout this stream. And finally, after that, we're of course going to cover the Tudors. All of the English Reformation is going to happen under the Tudors. So we're going to talk about all the Tudors, Henry VII to Elizabeth I. I marked in blue the 2 most important ones you probably need to know for the exam. They're usually the 2 big ones. Henry VIII, of course, the guy who started the whole thing, and Elizabeth with the English Compromise, Puritans. So they pop in and out. Last year, we had a short answer question about Henry VIII. So it's a very big topic. It's not just a fun topic. It's a topic that appears in the exam. So definitely think about this topic as we study along. Okay? So let's get into it. So map of England. So again, when we talk about England, this is AP Europe, but England is kind of isolated, as you can see in the map, away from the European continent. Being isolated, that means also they're a little bit further away from European affairs sometimes, and their administration is a little bit far off. That explains a little bit why also they don't have the best relationship with the Catholic Church. We'll get to that later on. Now, the context getting into the Reformation in England is the War of the Roses. Thumbs up, anyone knows anything about the War of the Roses? Who's into this? We actually also did a poll about, a poll about who do you think is the villain in the whole, who's a more villain, Richard III or Henry VIII? And I'm like, yeah, Henry is getting the big numbers up till now. So we'll see throughout the stream. Maybe we'll change the minds over it. So a little bit about the War of the Roses. That's just the background to the Reformation. You probably don't need to know too much about this conflict. The War of the Roses was a conflict between the House of Lancaster and the House of York. It's very Game of Thrones, if you will. Anyone fans of Game of Thrones? By the way, a lot of this Henry stuff, or monarchy in England, is kind of very Game of Thrones. There's constant competition who's going to rule. So basically a competition between the House of Lancaster and the House of York. Each one picked a color to depict the house that they stand for. And this got very, very popularized in Shakespeare's famous play, Richard III. And Richard III, the play, if we take into the context, was written during the reign of Elizabeth I, daughter of Henry VIII. So Richard got depicted in a very negative way as being this person who's like a hunchback. And so that's how the whole War of the Roses really, really got popularized. Now, the War of the Roses ended in the Battle of Bosworth in 1485. You see here on the right, Richard III, who was the king during that time. And the claimer to the throne was Henry Tudor, who came back from exile after 15 years, landed in England and went into this battle. Henry Tudor won the battle and became the King of England. Richard got defeated, and the famous line in the play Richard III is a horse, a kingdom for my horse. Richard got stripped down, taken all of his gold away from him, just got stabbed severely and just left in the field. And nobody knew for a long time what happened to him. I actually shared a link in Call for Action if you want to see. There's a fascinating documentary about the discovery of the body of Richard III. Yes, they found his body a few years ago. It was like one of the weirdest stories in the world. Nobody believed it to be true. They did a DNA testing, and sure enough, it was Richard III. The reason behind the fact that they were looking for his body is to see if the people who sponsored that they always claimed that Richard got a bad rap in history, that he wasn't a hunchback, that the whole Shakespeare thing was just a ploy, that he was the good guy and Henry VII was the cruel guy. But funny enough, they found the body and he was actually spoiler alert, he was a hunchback. So it wasn't, maybe Shakespeare wasn't completely off. Was he a villain? That's still a lot of people debate about it to this day. So anyway, Henry VII won the War of the Roses. This is the beginning of the House of Tudor. So he becomes the first Tudor king, takes the name Henry, fourth being Henry VII in 1485. And that's how the Tudors started. We don't need to know too much about him for the exam. We'll just for now say he was a very frugal person, very stingy with money. And when he died, he left Henry a lot of money. His stinginess is very important when it comes to the whole marriage of Henry and Catherine of Aragon. So that's pretty much what you probably need to know about the War of the Roses, that Henry VII won the conflict, Richard III got defeated, and that's how the Tudor started. Henry VII also reflects the new monarchy. If you studied in class, kind of like French, Spanish monarch during that time, that they're trying to consolidate their power and remove power from the noblemen. So that's kind of, he belongs to that group that tries to unite their country. Any questions up till now? We good? Just give me some responses so I'll know if we're all good with that. All right, let's move on and talk about the Tudors. So the Tudors, thumbs up, I love it. Beautiful. Let's talk about the Tudors. It's always good to have like a family tree with the Tudors. It's so complicated. Henry VIII, of course, is famous for having what? Anyone? Henry VIII famous for how many wives? Who can count? 6. There we go. Okay, so Henry VIII, most popular, of course, for having 6 wives. We're not, for test purposes, we probably don't need to know all of his wives. The first 2 are the important ones, but we'll won't leave the other one out. So just to make the chart a little bit, 6 wives. That's there's one poem, of course, about it. Everyone knows the order of who got chopped and who got divorce. But in any case, back to our topic, Henry VII married Elizabeth of York. That's how they ended the War of the Roses. So we have a York and a Lancaster marrying, and that was the end of one way to put the conflict behind. And divorces, beheaded, died, divorces, beheaded, survived. There we go. That's the chart. Very good. But we need to remember the first 2, the divorce and the behead. That's the one we're talking about, and they're the one who have a lot more influence in history than the other 4. So Henry VII and Elizabeth had several children. The most important one we're talking about, Henry was not actually supposed to be the King of England. He had an older brother named Arthur, and he was supposed to be the king. Now they married for an alliance reason. They married Arthur with Catherine of Aragon, who was the daughter of, who knows, the daughter of which monarch, what country? Who knows their AP Europe? Catherine of Aragon. Where's Aragon? Spain. There we go. Love it. Love it. You guys are in good shape. So Catherine of Aragon from Spain, the daughter of Ferdinand and Isabel. That Sweden, that could be 2. She was the daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella, the same monarchs that sponsored Columbus' voyage to the New World. So this was like a very important marriage alliance, because this alliance allows them, this marriage allows them to, first off, to make an alliance so there won't be a war. And the second thing, there's a big dowry involved. This is the crux of the matter. He was probably getting like 200,000 pounds, Henry VII, the frugal guy, for this marriage. So he was very, very excited about this marriage for that. Now, the problem is that Arthur is going to die very quickly, a few months after the marriage. That means the dowry has to be sent back. But Henry VII, being a frugal guy, is going to do what? Anyone? They're saying, okay, give us the money back. You know, the marriage is not working. Henry VII has another solution. He actually has 2 solutions. Option number 1, first, he suggested, how about his wife also died? How about I marry her? You know, save me some money. And then they said, of course, no, that's a horrible thing. And eventually, you know what? I have another son. There we go. Thank you for the right answer. I have another son, a little younger. So to keep the dowry, basically, he married her off to his next son in line, Henry VIII. And this is where a lot of legal problems are going to come from that situation. Okay? So now we're getting into our main character of the night, Henry VIII. But look at the young Henry VIII I posted in this picture. Okay, this is the young Henry VIII. We kind of all know him as this big, the fat guy who with the 6th wife and the eating and the killing and all that stuff. But Henry VIII actually starts off being like a nice person who's very, very close to his mother. We can call him kind of like a Renaissance man. He's a writer. He's a poet. He's a hunter, kind of like courtier, like if you studied Castellano about the perfect courtman, that's definitely him. Plays music, plays an instrument. He's very interested in astronomy. You know, wakes up his friend Thomas More in the middle of the night. You want to go and check up some stars? You know, it's very exciting stuff. Also, because he was not supposed to be the king, he got trained highly in religious matters. So he was definitely on the way to become a religious figure, maybe a career in the church. So that's why he was so interested in religion and studied so much religion. And when the whole Reformation, by the way, started, Henry doesn't really actually like Martin Luther. So this is very, very interesting how this person who is like not a big fan of Martin Luther, who hates the Reformation, is ended up going to be the guy who leads England away from the Catholic Church. So he writes a document attacking Martin Luther, and that document is called Defense of the Seventh Sacrament. But in reality, if you see a little note, I put this in the bottom, probably Thomas More's good friend wrote most of it. There's no way to prove it, but looking at Henry was an intellectual person too, but most likely More either helped him write most of it or wrote a big part of that. So anyway, Henry writes a defense of the Seventh Sacrament during the beginning of the Martin Luther Protestant Reformation, and the Pope is so excited about that gives him the title, the Defender of the Faith. And if you want to do a little Latin, you can do Fide Defensor. So that's kind of Henry VIII. Okay, so Henry starts off being anti-Luther, very strong Catholic, believes in the seven sacraments, really does not like this whole Protestant Reformation thing. Okay, now Henry VIII is going to rule from 1509 to 1547, so that's pretty long for in the standards of, an age when most people died at the age of 30. And this is kind of more of the Henry VIII that we remember, not the young Henry VIII, kind of like more of the beefy guy situation that we're going to talk about. Now, Henry VIII, as we mentioned, married here the young Catherine of Aragon. So she was only married for his brother for like several months. And she's the daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella. And she's also underlined, remember this point over here, she is the aunt of Charles V. Who's Charles V? Anyone? Big chin? He's a Habsburg. What's his job? Anyone? He leads an empire. H R. All right, so Holy Roman Empire. There we go. So very good. There's a very famous French philosopher that actually said, the funny thing about the Holy Roman Empire, it wasn't really holy, it wasn't really Roman, and it wasn't really an empire. So that's kind of out of three. But anyway, Charles V is the uncle of, the nephew. See, it's so complicated. This is the nephew of Catherine of Aragon. And this is another very, very important connection later on that is going to cause a lot of problem. So Henry basically is married to one of the more strongest family in Europe. So that's a very important thing to connect later on in the story. Now, they've been married for a really long time. And in the beginning, it seems from letters and information that we have, there is actually a lot of love over there. Henry's writes her love letters and all these sort of things. Again, young Henry VIII is very, very different than the beefy Henry VIII later on that we get into the story. The problem arises after 15 plus years of marriage is that Catherine has a lot of miscarriages, and altogether she just just gives Henry one child, Mary. And what's the problem with that? Anyone? Not a male. There we go. I'm sorry, I don't make the rules. Henry wants an heir. And in the old days, they used to say what? An heir and a spare, just in case like what happened to him. So he's saying, I'm the second Tudor. I cannot finish like the Tudor dynasty. I'm like the second one. This is not going to be good. So Henry is starting to get very, very angry at the whole situation. So what's his option now? Anyone? She's not giving him a son. He's going to get a divorce. Leave Catherine. Divorce. I love it. So yes, he's moving into this whole idea like, let's get a divorce, move away from this as fast as possible. And who is going to, according to the religion during that time, who allows to give a king, a monarch, a divorce? Anyone? The Pope. Yes, papacy. He has to get a divorce from the Pope, and he recruits to this mission. In those days, we have here on the right, Cardinal Wolsey is basically assigned with the task to get him an annulment. Henry, by the way, being a very religious person, after a while is starting to suspect that the many miscarriages might have been caused by God. He feels like he's very, very sinful. What is this whole thing about sin? He thinks that it says in the Bible that you're not supposed to marry your brother's wife. So he's thinking 1 + 1, oh, I married my brother's wife, God is punishing me, and that's why I cannot have a son. So based upon that theory, he basically goes to his main chief advisor, Cardinal Wolsey, and basically says, I need to get a divorce. And that's something that Cardinal Wolsey works for a really, really long time, trying to negotiate with the Pope. Please get an annulment, not even necessarily divorce, just claim that the marriage was not legal to start with because, it wasn't supposed to be approved. By the way, there's another passage in the Bible that said, you could, in certain situation, you need to marry your brother's wife to protect her. But, anyone picks a passage. That's what Henry cleaned onto it. And to make more things complicated, he's not only deciding that he wants to get a divorce, he wants an heir. Who else gets into the picture? Anyone? What else? What else is happening? There is Anne Boleyn. You guys know your stuff. This is too easy. Come on, Anne Boleyn, of course. There is the other woman, Anne Boleyn. So the same time that all of this is happening, he's also falling in love with the young Anne Boleyn. Now, Anne Boleyn gets a bad rap throughout history with she's always being seen as this villain, conniving person, or a dumb person. One thing we have to connect with Anne Boleyn, she was very, very educated. She was very, very smart. Her father sent her to Europe. She grew up in Europe. Her French was perfect. She was highly educated and highly intellectual. So she was not just seduced him. She really, really was a smart person to operate inside the time and really captures Henry. Wolsey thought that she's one of many other mistresses in that situation. He did not really understand that Anne Boleyn is here to stay and something bad will happen. So Wolsey is working really, really hard to get an annulment, to get a divorce, but there's a couple of things that are blocking the Pope to give Henry the divorce. And this is another thing we have to know the context. Bad timing, 1527, if you want to know that, is also a very important year in the history of Europe, is the year of the sack of Rome. This is also where it's starting to talk about all conflicts between the Catholics and the Protestant. The Pope, Clement VII, is basically a prisoner of Charles V. His soldiers are really, really getting mad for not being paid, and they actually sack Rome, and the Pope is actually even jailed for a certain time and basically being surrounded. So Henry needs to get approval for divorce from Pope Clement VII. But Clement VII is basically in bad situation, in a really nasty situation, be stuck, surrounded by Charles V. And who's Charles V again? How is he connected to all of this story? He is the chart again, uncle of Catherine nephew. There we go. So we make the connection. So why would he give a divorce to the person that is going to get his aunt, sack her for a younger woman? That doesn't make sense, right? So I would say, and some people throughout the years have estimated, the Pope would probably have given Henry a divorce for this situation because it's not worth it for him to lose an entire country for just one marriage. But the Pope was not in a situation that he can actually give him a divorce because Charles V was basically surrounding him. And that's how the whole family tree is very, very connected over here. So it's context to know all of this story. The divorce might have been given, but Henry is just stuck. Okay? And now into this picture, we're bringing one of the most important people in the history of the Protestant Reformation in England, Thomas Cranmer. So if you want to put a face to Reformation in England, this is the guy you probably want to remember for the exam. If Germany is Luther, if Switzerland is Calvin, England is Thomas Cranmer when it comes to religion. This is the person that basically made England a Protestant country in the theological sense. Henry is the founder, basically the person who's going to take England away from, break away from Rome, but he will still be a Catholic in most of his practices. It's Cranmer here that is basically going to be the face of Protestantism. So remember his face, underline his name, very, very important. So how is Thomas Cranmer getting into this story? Thomas Cranmer is one of many, many religious leaders during that time that has to sit and look through the text and the books and to figure out a way for Henry to get a divorce or an explanation why he can get a divorce. And he looks through all the text and looks throughout the history of Rome, and he finds a lot of things that sometimes decision had been made outside of Rome. And he finally basically went to the King of England and convinces him that there's a case to be made that the king should break away from the Pope. He's the person that basically comes up with this idea to Henry's. And because Henry wants to marry, wants a divorce, falls in love with Anne Boleyn. Anne Boleyn is also going to get pregnant to make things a little bit more, we need to rush to get this marriage going. All of these things are pushing Henry towards deciding that Cranmer's solution is the way to go. And also as a reward for all of his great ideas, he appoints him as the Archbishop of Canterbury. And that's an important title you also might want to remember in English. In Anglican Church, the Archbishop of Canterbury is kind of basically, if you want to, like the Pope of the English version of like the leader of the religious leader of the Anglican Church. So he appoints him as Archbishop of Canterbury, and quickly he basically grants him the divorce and from Catherine. And in 1533, he marries him. He actually officiates the wedding. He marries Henry with Anne Boleyn. So Thomas Cranmer, the person behind that. Now, this might actually appear in the test as an example of actual real legislation. What is all of this translating to? It's not just about divorce that Henry breaks away from England. So Henry breaks away from England because he wants to get Henry breaks away from the Catholic world because he wants to get a divorce. But how does that translate into real legislation? There are two laws you probably want to know for your AP exam. One is the Act of Supremacy, and the other one is the Act of Succession. So starting up with the Act of Supremacy that you see in front of you in the slide, and that was in 1534, basically declares that the king was the only supreme head on earth, basically the head of the Church of England. So the Act of Supremacy basically makes the king, in this case Henry VIII, the head of the church. No more Pope. From now on, the head of the church is Henry VIII. The other thing specifically relating to the divorce, the law that passes, is the Act of Succession. Who is next in line? Who theoretically is supposed to be next in line to after if Henry, let's say if Henry dies, who's next in line according to that? Very good. You guys know your stuff. I'm loving it. Mary is the next in line, but will Anne Boleyn allow her daughter to somebody else to take the claim from her? So Anne Boleyn is getting into the picture. Basically, we need to move Mary from succession. We need to put my daughter Elizabeth is next in line. So the Act of Succession basically cancels the marriage to Catherine of Aragon and makes Mary basically like a bastard child. So Elizabeth is legitimate, Mary out of the picture. So these are the two laws that are passing. And also, if you want to do as a side note, there's also a Treason Act connected to this law. So all the adults in England have to acknowledge the Act of Supremacy by oath, and also subject to imprisonment or even going to jail. So if you're going to go against Henry, if you're not going to accept this law, if you're not going to accept this marriage, this can mean like jail time or even your head, losing your head. Anyone knows famous Englishmen during that time that lost his head that did not agree with these laws? Give me one famous name. Thomas More with 3 O's. I love it. 2. Thomas More. Very good. The author of what famous book? I have it here. I have it. Who can see? Thomas More, the author of, I love it. Absolutely. Utopia. Very, very good. So that's also something you might have studied in your Northern Renaissance. Thomas More, it connects to probably the two people you need to know for the Northern Renaissance. Thomas More and the other famous humanist from Northern Europe. Anyone? Erasmus. Man, there's no wrong answers tonight. What is going on here? Okay. BFFs, Thomas More and Erasmus. So again, Thomas More, kind of very tragic figure in this whole story, is a classically person who was very, very interested in the classics. He was a lawyer, a very successful lawyer. He authored the book Utopia, and it doesn't appear that much in the textbook, but he and Henry were very good friends from a younger age. You know, I told you, like, he went and asked him to look about the stars. They had like intellectual debates. Henry was a very, very well-educated, round person. But Thomas More And again, he's the author of Utopia, talking about an ideal society, talking about equality in society. And he basically, being a Catholic, he could just not accept this marriage. He just could have kept his mouth shut and just didn't say anything, but he could not give an oath. And that's why, even though he was a very good friend of Henry VIII and actually also served as chancellor in Henry VIII's government, he basically is going to end up going into where a lot of people are going to go to. Anyone? Famous building where English people are being sent to when they're going to be executed? Who's been to England? Who's been to London? Who took the tour? What's it called? Famous building. The Tower of London. So poor Thomas More ends up over here. I highly recommend, if you go to England, take the tour in the Tower of London. The funny thing is when you go inside, poor guy. Yeah, poor guy. Don't feel bad for Thomas More. He was a really nice guy. He loved his family, educated his girls, taught them classics, during that time. Really, really one of the nice people during that time. There's a lot of mean people during this period of time, but poor Thomas More. Anyway, Thomas More ended up going to the Tower, as many people. I highly recommend that if you go to London, to take the tour in the Tower of London. The funny thing is when most people enter with the tourist group, they usually say, if you want to go to see the jewelry, you can just go ahead or stay with us with the tour group. And it's like 80% of people just go straight into the jewelry. Take the tour. It's a great tour. They show you all that stuff. They tell you interesting story about, like, there's so many famous English people that have been in the Tower throughout the years. But yes, goes all the way back to the William the Conqueror of 1066, the last monarch to basically conquer England. But anyway, poor Thomas More, the Tower of London. And again, you might want to know Thomas More in the context of Northern Renaissance, that he's the author of Utopia, talking about ideal society. Some people even talk about him as kind of like being the founder of socialism, that a lot of people refer back to him and stuff like that. Okay, so let's just continue. But what does that mean now? Okay, so England broke away relationship with the Pope. But what does that translate into? What does that actually mean? So Henry also decides to break the monasteries. One of the first off, they break relationship with the Catholic Church. No more delegates, no more financial dealings, no more nothing. In reality, what that means on the ground is that they take over the monasteries and the nunneries. They're two separate times when they break both of them. And this is where I get to the financial reason. Henry is going to confiscate and take a lot of land from the Catholic Church, which is estimated, we don't have the exact number, that's around 20% of the land of England. And in England during that time was owned by the Catholic Church. So that's a lot of money. And Henry, kind of like learning something from his father, Henry VII, Mr. Frugal Central, is he sells the land to the nobility and the gentry. Gentry is also an important word you might want to know for the test, and that's the land owning class, people who buy land and get their status from owning a lot of land. Kind of like if you talk about the American colonies, it's very similar to that. Now, what that does, it actually makes the gentry connect more to Henry VIII, and it gives him more money. So it's strengthening the gentry, lowering the power of the nobility, and more money for Henry. The other important thing that he does in terms of the Reformation, he actually puts a Bible, is translated into English. And the funny thing is, just a decade or two before they burn a person who actually wrote an English Bible, a Tyndale Bible, because it was illegal to have a Bible in a different language. And now basically Henry is ordering the translation of the Bible. And later on in 1611, they'll have one official English Bible that is still used to this day. Anyone knows the official Bible in England that everyone uses? It's named after a king, but it's not Henry. King James Bible, there we go. It's actually, they're probably a really, really nice Bible, very Shakespearean language, very, very classic. Anyway, that's the official version. But by the way, between you and me, 80% of that Bible was taken from Tyndale. So, they made this big committee of 80 people to edit and to create the King James's Bible. So that wasn't one guy, but 80% they took from Tyndale. I'm all about giving credit to the people who's been taken away from them. That's all I'm all about. Okay, now let's talk about causation. If we get into the causation question, and that was one of the questions last year, the short answer question. So why did Henry break away from the church? Most people if they answer that question, they all go back to Henry VIII needed a divorce from Catherine of Aragon. That's something that most people know about Henry VIII. She didn't give him a son, so he got divorced. So that's the personal reason why he got a divorce. But we're going to add two more reasons for causation. Why did why England broke away from the church? The other one is political power. More power to the monarchs. So if we talk about the new monarchies going back to Henry VII and Ferdinand and Isabella and Charles VII in France, all these monarchs were looking to get more power. And one way for them to get power is basically to kick away the Catholic Church, to take over their land, to tax a lot of these ministers that don't get taxed. That's going to give a lot more money to Henry VIII. So the political power he's going to get from that is going to consolidate more power to him. He's now the head of the church, and he's also the ruler. You used to have the two swords. The one is the spiritual one under the Pope, and the other one is under the king. So he's basically taking both of them together. So, he's got two for one. So that's going to give him more power. The third reason, we're talking economics, more money. 20% of the land, that's a lot of money. So some people said the motivation behind it, some advisors were talking to him about breaking away from the church, saying, we can make a lot of money, take away land, that's not that bad. So that's another reason to get into that. Okay, so that's the motivation behind that. And of course, we're talking about Henry VIII is famous for having 6 wives. So we talked about Catherine of Aragon. She had one daughter, that's Mary. We talked about Anne Boleyn, the second wife. And she also gave him only one daughter, even though she promised him, I will give you a male heir. That didn't work out. And later on, Henry really got mad, heard a lot of some bad rumors about Anne Boleyn doing some PG-13, that's not PG-13 stuff. I can't say it. So basically, Henry decided to execute Anne Boleyn. And then we move it to wife number 3, Jane Seymour. She's the one actually that actually gave him the son that he always wanted. She actually died in childbirth. Henry claimed from all the 6 wives, he loved her the most. She was like, basically gave him all that you wanted, and then she died. Very sad. So the other 3, sorry, we don't have time for them. You don't probably need to know them for the tests. So these are the wives that actually gave him children, and that's why later on they're also remembered. So also, just to make clear that Henry is not a reformer. He doesn't want to make England Protestant. He makes it very clear in 1539 by passing the 6 articles that even though he broke the nunneries and the monasteries, and there's an English Bible, England's pretty much still a Catholic country. So he passes law that he basically tells the clergy, you have to be celibate. You're not allowed to marry. And he basically threatens some of them that he's going to kill them if they're going to do that. So it's kind of like being a little hypocrite. You want to get a divorce, but these guys are not allowed to get married. So Henry basically is still a Catholic. So if you're going to deny the ritual or any of these things, you're basically going to get in trouble. So that's another great thing if we're going to compare Henry to Luther. They're actually not that far off. That's what a lot of people miss. Martin Luther and Henry basically have similar viewpoints on a lot of the practices. But in the end of the day, we're going to talk about that Henry VIII still believes in the 7 sacraments, and Luther, if you study the Reformation with Luther, only believes in 2 sacraments. If we talk about the motivation behind their action, so Luther actually wanted to break away from the church because he had religious reason. He actually understood that the church is corrupt, self-indulgences, all the things that you saw in your last stream. I'm not going to get into that. Henry did it, as we saw, from political, personal, and economical reasons. Also, where the doctrine, when it comes to doctrine, Luther is going to come up with the doctrine of sola scriptura, only what's in the scripture. And Henry is going to be more, scripture, but also the rulings of the fathers of the church throughout the years. He's going to support that. And famous text, if you want to remember for both of them, Defense of the 7th Sacrament is a famous text for Henry, and Luther, you probably be good to remember the 95 Thesis. That's pretty much about Henry VIII. We're going to move along because we're talking about the English Reformation. We're going to talk about the only son that he had, Edward VI, who's going to be the third Tudor in line. So we talked about Henry VII, Henry VIII. We're moving into Edward VI. So Edward VI became a king when Henry died, and he was only 9 years old. So he technically wasn't really ruling. He had more regents or advisors that ran his government. And important thing to connect during that time is that his advisors were very, very Protestant. So if England broke away from Rome under Henry, under Edward VI, this is the time that England will really become a real full-blown Protestant country. So during his reign, England fully enacts the Protestant Reformation, as I wrote here. And he basically cancels all the 6 articles. He allows clerical marriages, the whole conflict that they had about communion with the cup, without the cup, so they basically now both of them were legal. There was a big fear for Catholics, like you're not supposed to hold the cup because that's the blood of Christ and might spill. So this the priest is doing that and you're just getting the bread. But Protestants say we want both of these things. So now both of them are enacted. And Thomas Cranmer, which we just mentioned like maybe 10 minutes ago, is still in the picture. One of those people that survived Henry. A lot of people got executed. Cranmer made it through Henry, but he's not going to make it for too long. Pay attention. Thomas Cranmer is basically the father, as I mentioned, of English Reformation. He's the one that is going to write the Common Book of Prayer, which is the prayer book that they're going to use in services. And he's also going to be the person to write the 42 Articles of Confession of Faith, which basically explains all the belief system of the Anglican Church. So all the things that you want to know about the Catholic Church are listed in the teachings of Thomas Cranmer. And he basically taught very, very similar things to Luther. You probably don't need to know of them. He believed in sola scriptura, scripture only. He believed in the supremacy of the Holy Scripture, justification by faith. He also recognized only 2 sacraments, and also the removals of images from the altar, like sacrilege, to have these sort of things. So it would have been like England became Protestant and everything is working fine, but there's a twist to the plot. He dies in 1553, only at the age of 15. And who's next in line? Anyone can tell me after Edward VI? Mary, also known as, who wants a drink? As only if you're 21. Next in line is Mary, the daughter from, who was her mother? Bloody Mary. Look, everyone popped with the Bloody Mary. You guys know your drinks and your history. I love it. Okay, so Mary is the daughter of Catherine of Aragon. Okay, so after Edward, she's next in line. Edward, by the way, is trying to give his cousin Jane like the throne because she's a Protestant. They're afraid from a Catholic coming on. That doesn't really work out. She kind of reigns for 9 days. And hardcore Catholic. There we go. Good stuff. Yeah. She was a hardcore Catholic. Thank you. Like her mother. And she did not like this whole Protestant thing once in a while. So England now, if you thought became Protestant, is going to do a 360 back to Catholicism. That's right. Under Mary's reign, England is doing back into Catholicism. So that's why the English Reformation is a little bit complicated, going back and forth. Also, she decides she's going to establish a marriage by producing a male heir as quickly as possible. Yes, she executes Cranmer and many other leaders. We're going to get to in a second. Good stuff. So before she gets to all that killings, then that's why she gets her name. She marries her first cousin removed, Philip. So the ruler, if you still remember, of the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, basically saying, why don't you marry my son, Philip? Some history book got the ages wrong. That's saying she was 20 years older than them. I double checked that. She was only 11 years older than them, but she was definitely older than him. Philip was not really Philip II. We're going to talk about him. Has a pregnancy, which turns out to be a tumor, possibly. Yeah. So yeah. All correct stuff, people. You guys are like 2 steps ahead of the game. I love it. Okay, so She was a strong Catholic. She moves England back into Catholicism, and she marries her cousin Philip II, who's not really interested in her that much, and he basically splits after like a year and a half. He actually saying to her sister Elizabeth, "Why don't you marry me?" Now, as some of you have mentioned before, she passed also the Heresy Act, and she persecuted and prosecuted too, persecuted many Protestants. 300 of them were burned and beheaded. And among the most famous of them is Thomas Cranmer, the person who started the Reformation. Now, he has a fascinating story. They really, really want to humiliate him for all the stuff that he has done, the divorce and all these sort of things. So they kind of like take him and then they jail him and torture him and all that stuff. They want him to like repent everything and say Catholicism is good and I've been a sinner. And then it doesn't work out. Then they take him out, and then they ask him, then they dress him up nice, give him nice clothing, and basically saying like, wouldn't you like this better way? They basically get him to bad cop, good cop. They basically get him to claim, yes, that I've been sinful and, Catholic is the right way. But eventually they're going to put him into the fire. But then he actually claims that it was all lies and that he was a Protestant and Catholicism is a sin. And he basically comes out very, very strong in the end. Now, Mary is the one who gets in history because of these persecution. She is the one that gets the nickname Bloody Mary for all the killings. But did she kill that many people? In reality, actually, Elizabeth probably killed a lot more than she did. But why she ended up being called Bloody Mary? Because history is written by the, drumroll, who writes history? The winners. There we go. The winners, the victors. The winners write the history. So if Mary could have continued, you might have had, I don't know, like Bloody Henry VIII or something like that. She ends up getting the nickname Bloody Mary for the killing, even though she didn't kill that many people. Now, she does, as somebody mentioned us before, she has some sort of a phantom pregnancy. She believes she's pregnant. Sometimes the body catches up with her. It could have been a tumor. We don't have the medical records for what exactly happened. And then she dies in 1558, only 5 years. And then we're coming into the last ruler from the Tudors. Anyone? Who's the last in line we got to talk about tonight? Elizabeth. Very good. Elizabeth. How many Elizabeths ever ruled England? Anyone knows? So she's Elizabeth I. How many more Elizabeth ruled? We're on the second. That's right. So today there's Elizabeth II. Altogether, we have two Queen Elizabeth. She was first, and now we have Elizabeth II. Very good. So Elizabeth II is bringing us back into Protestantism once and for all, and she, in England, remains to this day a Protestant nation. So she is also known as the Virgin Queen. She never actually got married. Probably saw the execution of her mother. Probably was not that excited about marriage. And she's the one. Also, the Virginia is named after her. The settlement in North America really starts during her reign. James I, after her, basically started the colony of Jamestown, the first permanent settlement in America. Now, she's the one that is going to reach the eventual compromise between the Catholics and the Protestants, somewhere in the middle. She is not interested in more to have religious wars or conflicts, this back and forth. So she's going to reach the compromise. Survival. Basically, you need to compromise. And she's a very, very smart ruler. And you can see in the years that she actually ruled close to 40 years. She really, really ruled for a long, long time. So she was very, very wise, and she understood the situation. From the one hand, Catholics want England to go back to Catholicism. Then you're going to have what we're going to talk about, the Puritans, who want to clean up everything and cancel everything from the Catholic Church. So she's going to find kind of a middle way, and it's during her age that they basically create the Anglican Church that is kind of a mix between Catholicism and Protestantism. So the services look still Catholic, and there's still a hierarchy, kind of like same where in the Catholic world. But the substance, the sacraments, and the real practices are Protestant. So that's kind of the compromise that she has. So they're going to include the 39 Articles, which has a lot of Cranmer theories in them, and the Book of Prayer that Cranmer wrote. So this is going to be the foundation of the Anglican Church, and the compromises reached during that time. Also, if we want to talk about another conflict, during her reign, also, if you want to remember, there's a lot of conflict going on with Spain. Spain is unhappy with England having a Protestant queen. The Pope is actually saying, that Elizabeth is a heretic, or anyone who kills her is doing a good job, or is doing God's work. And she's kind of being challenged by Mary, Queen of Scots. Did anyone see the new Mary, Queen of Scots movie that came out? So check it out. It got a lot of bad reviews. I thought it wasn't that bad. I mean, Mary Queen of Scots made a lot of bad decisions in the whole stories, but it's very interesting. By the way, she and Elizabeth never actually met in real life, even though in the movies they always kind of have a meeting and having all these fighting and conversation. That's like history versus reality. But anyway, there are a lot of people that were very, very interested in putting Mary into the crown because she was like the next in line, basically. Considered more. That's correct. Religious. She basically, to get back to the conflicts between them, Philip of Spain is not happy, and Mary, Queen of Scots, is kind of getting involved in all these letters and conspiracy to remove Elizabeth. And eventually, a plot is being discovered that Mary, Queen of Scots is kind of trying to undermine Elizabeth. Elizabeth reluctantly eventually has Mary, Queen of Scots executed, and this basically leads Philip II, by the urgence of the Pope, to create a massive armada and to send it into England and hopefully remove Elizabeth from the crown and putting a Catholic person in power. So that's the background to the Spanish Armada, which is a very, very important armada. It's just Spanish for a big fleet. So 130 ships in 1588 are on their way to attack England. England is an island. Somehow, from bad weather conditions and good luck for the English, somehow half of the Spanish fleet is basically destroyed from bad weather and bad maneuvers. And England actually see this as a huge victory. This makes Elizabeth even more popular, and kind of England ego is a little bit higher, and they start thinking more about empire terms. So Spanish Armada victory for Elizabeth makes her super popular. The Protestant wins. Everything works. The Protestant win. That's a good one too. Increasing tension. So during her reign, there's increased tension. There's the separatists. There's the Puritans. If you take APUS, you probably want to know all about all that stuff. And to wrap things up, she dies. She does not have any. She doesn't have any children. So the next in line is, who's next in line after her? Anyone remembers? She doesn't have any children. James. James is the son of who? Who's his mother? James. It's going to be James VI of Scotland, is the son of Mary, Queen of Scots. So Mary, Queen of Scots, some people say, see, I wanted the end, my child isn't power. But anyway, James, and I'm going to do a whole series lecture about the English Civil War in a month or so. So we'll pick up with James the First and all the interesting stuff James did. He has kind of a Hamlet lifestyle, what happened with him. Anyway, to wrap things up, the Church of, to wrap things up about the Church of England, no, it did not happen. End up being Catholic, but him and a lot of his descendants had a lot of Catholic tendencies. So that will be a background to the English Civil Wars and a lot of push back and forth. But James is Protestant. James, even though his mother was Catholic, was raised as a Calvinist Protestant, but he's got some Catholic tendency, and that's going to create a lot of tension. But that's the next stream. To finish it up, England ends up with all of this conflict becoming a Protestant nation, and the Church of England today is kind of in between Catholics and Protestants. Sometimes people go to an Anglican church, they're like, is this a Catholic church? It looks kind of Catholic, but it's Protestant. So to summarize up, the Church of England, also known as the Anglican Church, the service is in English. They have 2 sacraments like most Protestants. That's baptism and communion. They don't have any monasteries. They have clergy, but they're allowed to marry. There's still a hierarchy, Archbishop of Canterbury is still like the leader of their church, and bishops. So they still have the hierarchy. They don't have that in Protestant places. So I said it before, but it's, as it's stated here in the slide, the Anglican worship tends to be the Protestant in the doctrine and more Catholic in appearance. So it looks Catholic, but the beliefs are more Protestant. So it's kind of like the compromises, that's the middle way. So the middle way is the compromise that Elizabeth reached in the end of her reign, and that's what England has today. Yeah, but no images. Yes, there was a lot of whitewashing. They washed a lot of the things like statues. Yeah, I mean, it looks still very exciting. It looks more exciting than a Protestant church. If you see here, the color still looks a lot more, but the images are kind of gone. But there's music or there's incense. There's still like some Catholic things, and that's why Puritans are not happy. It still looks to them a little bit Catholic. Okay. And by the way, people, this was the SAQ last year on the APUSH exam. So we might want to go there with questions at the end. So these are some questions that you might expect. I mean, if it was last year, they won't give exact, but you can see the first question was a causation question that they asked, one reason why Henry VIII wanted to get a divorce. And we actually gave 3 tonight. Or political effect. That's another thing that we talked about. So these are some things that you might think about today. So again, think Fibeable. Check us Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. This is my contact info. That's my website for Tai Chi. That's a whole different story. And now it's time if we get some questions. If anyone has any questions. I mean, we gave a lot of information. You guys seem to really, really know your stuff. I was very, very impressed by all the information that we got. So ask a question. All right, let's see what we got here. Why did the Pope approve why did the Pope did not approve Henry VIII request? So I think I kind of answered that earlier on, but he couldn't actually give him the divorce because he was surrounded by Charles V. So that kind of actually got him, Charles V basically surrounded him, and he could not give him a divorce because he was the uncle of Catherine of Aragon. So that basically got him stuck. He would have given him the divorce if he could. Next question. Why was Henry VIII given the title Defender of the Faith by Pope Leo X? So he was given the title Defender of the Faith because he wrote the defense of the 7 sacraments. So he wrote the defense of the 7th sacrament in the time that Martin Luther was attacking the church, and the Pope was like, attaboy, good job. I'm very happy with that. So that's why he got with that. Okay, what about the Presbyterian? So the Presbyterian is kind of like a separate thing that is developing in Scotland, and that connects also later on to James and all the other guys that are going to, when we talk about in the next lecture about the absolute. So it kind of developed separately. England has its own problem. It's only during the reign of James I and his son Charles I that they're going to seek uniformity between all the parts of England and try and create a united kingdom, and that's going to backfire big time. There's going to be fights with all these sort of things, and the Scots eventually will just maintain their Presbyterian, and England will not be able to stop them from that. But that's going to be in the next section. Beautiful. Any other questions? Anyone? So let's look at our poll at the end. So definitely I'm seeing Henry VIII is getting to be the bigger villain. Richard III does not get enough movies as Henry VIII does. So again, I posted, I don't know if you see it in the call of action, I put like a documentary film about Richard III. It's really, really fascinating how they discovered his body. I probably shouldn't tell you, that's a big spoiler alert, but it's a really, really fascinating story how they found the body, and the people who do a lot. They got a lot more TV. There's so many movies about the Tudors, and every second person I talk to, they're like, "Oh, I've seen like 15 movies." There's so many mini series. There's every year they're releasing. Make a movie about somebody else. Make a movie about James. He's a fascinating character. Why is Henry getting all the attention? Anyway, to get back to Richard III, the group that actually sponsored the excavation, they claimed that Richard got a bad rap in history, that he wasn't a hunchback. It was all a myth that, that Shakespeare created. It wasn't true. So they sponsored the expedition to prove that Richard III was not a hunchback and he wasn't a mean guy at all. They figured once they found the body. And once they found the body, spoiler alert, it turns out that Richard III was a hunchback. Yes, you should have seen the movie. The woman is just in shock. They spent all this money, but she was still like, Richard is still a good guy. So yeah, that was the story of Richard III, and they had like a funeral for a monarch that died 500 years ago. I figured that. It's very, very interesting. Okay, so if there's no other question, you guys have been great. Thanks for the support. Thanks for all the questions and comments, and thank you all. Great. It's been great. And again, remember, Fibeable, continue watching. I'm going to do a lot of streams more about art. If you're interested in Baroque art, I'll do things about that. And we're also going to do, continuing talking about this, probably in like 3 weeks, I will do the next series. We'll talk about the English Civil War. We'll talk about James I and his son Charles I. We'll talk about Oliver Cromwell and the English Civil War, and probably will lead all the way to the Glorious Revolution eventually, and how England, like how a lot of these monarchs lost a lot of their power to Parliament, how all of these things happen. So thank you all. Ireland too, yes. Oliver Cromwell went into Ireland, did a lot of bad things in Ireland, but did some interesting things. There were 12 days of Christmas. There's only one. Cromwell took 11 of them, Puritans. Some of them also settle in America, so that connects. If you're taking a push, it's also connected. So anyways, you guys have been great. Thank you so much, and I'll see you. My next stream is October 6th. Keep on following Fibeable. Okay, you guys have been great. Peace out. Thank you.